Let's talk about some of the questions from the NET examination for psychology. Now you have the first question. This talks about some of the characteristics of the disease. So based on this, we need to understand that there are questions where you have symptoms that are asked, and based on the symptoms you have to find out which disease it is. So for example, here you are focusing on establishing problems, establishing social relations, repetitive behavior and poor language skills. So this is a characteristic of autism. So autism comes as a right answer. When we talk about catatonic schizophrenia, this is a kind of schizophrenia where you have problems in movement of body parts. OCD, which is a kind of obsessive compulsive disorder where you have a kind of uncontrollable thoughts and compulsions that you want to do certain thing. And apraxia is basically an inability to perform a action purposefully. So that is the meaning of these terms. However, based on the symptoms, you have autism as the right option. The next is vacillation of thoughts, and vacillation of thoughts and behavior is associated with wish conflict. Now this talks about indecisionness or being undecisive. So you are not able to take a exact decision what you want to do, what you don't want to do, and this happens in various things like approach conflict, approach avoidance conflict, or multiple approach avoidance that occurs. So this is the right option that you have. So the whole idea is based on the type of conflict, there is always a kind of indecision making in the thoughts that whether you should do this or you should not do this. Okay, the next is which of the following is true for bootstrapping. So when we talk about bootstrapping in statistics, we are relying on random sampling method. Now if you want to know more about sampling, we have covered that in a separate lecture, so you can understand that for detail. But yes, bootstrapping basically focuses on accuracies in measurement. So it involves large number of subsamples that are there, and it does not rely on the assumptions about the population alone, and it is based on sample data. It is not applicable to nomothetic, but it is applicable to other data sets as well. So you would have 1, 2 and 4 as the right option. As I said, it focuses on accuracies in measurement and random sampling. So sample sets are usually taken into consideration. The next is general assumptions of a parametric statistics are. Now parametric test is a test where you have assumptions about the parameter which defines the properties of the population distribution. So there are certain parameters that we take into account. The first is normality, which talks about a normal probability curve. The next is homogeneity of the variance. So variance should be similar, it should be homogeneous in nature. Then you have a kind of linearity that is seen, which is a kind of linear relationship with the data. So you would have a linear relationship with the data and independence of data. So homogeneity among variance, and you would have independence of data. So those are some of the major characteristics of a parametric statistics that are taken into account. The next is in a child's cognitive transition from external influences to internal thoughts, there are 4 stages. Now what are those? The first is a primitive stage, which is also known as the naive stage. The next is next to the natural stage is the naive stage. Next to the naive stage, you have the egocentric stage, and finally the ingrowth stage. So that is a kind of evolution in the cognitive transitions from external influence to internal thoughts that occurs. So under the primitive stage, let's say a child will experiment with sound, so would create different kind of sounds. Under a naive stage, the child would basically try to speak out certain words without meaning, without purpose. So aba baba blah 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 blah. So that is a kind of naive stage where you do not associate meanings to the word. Egocentric speech is where you have hands or toys that are used to basically express the objects or express oneself, express thoughts. And finally the ingrowth stage. Now this is where a child starts to develop internalization of thoughts and takes a challenge to complete the task in hand. So that is how you have the growth and development that occurs. Now the next important thing that we need to understand is a usually common questions based on neuropsychology. the right hemispheres and the left hemispheres of the brain. So the left hemisphere of the brain controls your right hand, and as a result the content of analytical understanding, logical approach, mathematical reasoning is governed by the left hemisphere of the brain. However, when we talk about right hemisphere controls your left hand, and people who are creative with music, or let's say composers, artists, are usually have a kind of sound development of right hemisphere. So you would have composers as the right option, the rest deal with the left hemisphere. The next is, which of the following is not a characteristic of attention? Now, when we talk about attention, it is important that attention is a behavioral cognitive process of selectively concentrating on certain aspects of information. So, it is a kind of processing capacity and selectiveness, as we said. There is initial detection of the stimuli that takes place, and finally the control. Automatic processing is not part of the attention. Attention is a voluntary process, and therefore automatic processing is not required. If I feel I need to be attentive in this lecture, I will be attentive. So that means it's a voluntary action. It's not autonomous. It's not autonomic like a heart beating continuously. Okay. The next is, expectancy theory of learning was given by Tolman. Now this is a very direct question. Guthrie basically talked about the contiguity theory. Hull focused on the drive reduction theory, and Thorndike talked about connectionism. So we have covered those in our lectures on learning separately. So the general theory and the authors or the scientists, psychologists associated with the development of those theories. So this was a kind of basic question that are usually asked. The next is an interesting question. Retrieval is most commonly explained on as a basis of which generation recognition theory? Now, generation recognition theory is also where we focus on stimuli response. So basically what happens is, you are talking about information processing, iconic image, and sensory register. So all these three would be the right part. Now retrieval is whatever is stored in my memory, I am trying to retrieve. So let's say I read this topic 2 months ago. Now this is the exam, I am appearing for the question paper. So what I am trying to do is, I am trying to recall what I had learned during that time, and this is based on the information processing. Might be there was some sign, some symbol that stores in my mind, so it's a kind of iconic memory. And then there is also a kind of sensory register which helps in the recognition retrieval process. Primary effect has no role in retrieval, basically when we focus on the general recognition theory. Okay. The last question for now is, in the retrograde amnesia, which of the following kind of problem is seen? Now, retrograde amnesia is the loss of the memory occurring prior to the event. So, retrograde is prior to the event, anterograde is after the event. So, before the onset of the injury, we could say. So, problems with recalling a previously learnt material is what is known as retrograde amnesia. So, amnesia basically means forgetting. So there are two kinds of forgetting. One is retrograde, one is anterograde, and we have covered this in detail in our class on forgetting. So just go back and refer to the class on forgetting for more detail. If you have any doubts, any questions, feel free to post those in the comment section below. We will be more than happy to attend your questions, and definitely we have put up all the solutions for your last paper. So very important, cover at least last 5 years paper very carefully. You will get a general idea and insight about what kind of questions usually come up for your examination. We would be discussing many interesting topics. Have a wonderful day ahead.